You think you know them. Giants are often depicted today as dull-witted, clumsy, lumbering fools. Otherwise, they're portrayed as monsters, who subsist on a steady diet of raw children. But the Giants of Cornwall stand apart. Their works and deeds can still be seen across the Cornish countryside. Their story hints at a much older time, at a lost and mythic society, and at an ancient land that existed long before Britain. This is the story of how these giants shaped the very landscape, and of how they laid the groundwork for British mythology for years to come. This is the story of how the hills were formed. Hi everybody, and welcome back to Beasts of the Old World, a channel all about ancient folklore and mythical creatures from across the globe. I'm Nick, and today we're looking at the story of the Cornish giants, who they were, why they disappeared, and how they serve as an origin myth for Great Britain. As always, dropping a like and a comment on the video is incredibly helpful, and if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and set notifications so that you catch new episodes when they come. With that said, let's get into it. St Agnes is a small, quaint village on the northern coast of Cornwall. Standing on a high moor of gorse and heather, it's a popular tourist spot, famous today for its beautiful countryside, its beaches, and opportunities for surfing. But this is an ancient place, and like many ancient places in Cornwall, giants are never very far away. It is here that we find Chapel Porth, a narrow valley ending in red streaked cliffs dotted with sea-carved caves. Some of the rocks here have this unusual red hue, the product of a meeting of a fearsome giant known as Bolster with St Agnes herself. Stick around for when we tell this story in full later in the video. The land around this quaint little village is just one example of Cornwall's wild and weathered charm. It's a land of rugged cliffs and undulating, windswept moors. The whole landscape feels ancient, elemental, carved over endless years into a place of stark beauty and enduring mystery. Its folklore is rich and can be found everywhere you go. Stories of King Arthur, of the devil, of Spriggans and Piskies are to be found in every corner of this land. But the mythical creature Cornwall is most famous for is the giant. One of the best resources for ancient Cornish mythology is Robert Hunt's 19th century work, Popular Romances of the West of England. In this work, Hunt mentions many legendary locations associated with the giants, most of which were already obscure local legend even then. Tales speak of the giant's hand, the giant's chair, the giant's cradle, to name just a few. Unfortunately, the true locations of most of these sites today are lost to us. Though it must be said, when walking through a landscape such as this one, you're never short of candidates. I am looking to get out into Cornwall soon, so let me know in the comments if you'd like to see an episode where we go in search of some of these ancient, legendary sites. Even if some of these are lost to time, some sites remain well known today, and when we visit these places, it's easy to see how these legends took hold. Two of the most famous examples are Trencrom Hill and St Michael's Mount. Hunt tells us that
the giants of Trencrom and St Michael's Mount often met for a game at bob buttons. The mount was the bob on which flat masses of granite were placed to serve as buttons, and Trencrom Hill was the spot from which the throw was made. On the outside of St Michael's Mount, numerous piles of rough cubical masses of rock, said to be the granite of Trencrom Hill, show how eagerly the game was played.
Hunt goes on to reference Halliwell's Footsteps of the Giants, in which the author states that, doubtlessly, the Giant's chair on Trink Hill was frequently used during the progress of the game, nor is it improbable that the Giant's Well was also in requisition. So are these huge scattered stones entirely natural, or in fact relics left behind by these terrific beings and their deeds? Another example is down at Dodman Point on the south coast, where we find an earthwork trench they once called the Hack and Cast, now known as the Bulwark, 20 feet deep, running from cliff to cliff. Legend tells us that a doctor bled a giant to death here, seemingly a common trope in giant stories, and the headland still bears his name, the Dodman, or Dead Man. There are many more stories featuring giants in Cornish tradition, far too many to mention here. Curiously, none ever describe their physical appearance in any way other than alluding to their size and strength, instead focusing on their deeds in life. We may never know what they really looked like, but if the stories are to be believed, we can see their handiwork, visible even today in the hills and cliffs, in the valleys and tors of this ancient place. For indeed, Cornish folklore sees the land as being carved by mythical hands, and almost always attributes apparently natural landmarks to these ancient beings. In fact, the giants here are viewed as the origins of Britain itself. In the 12th century, around the year 1136, Geoffrey of Monmouth wrote his History of the Kings of Britain. Curiously, this sweeping account doesn't begin with a king, but with the arrival of a fleet of Trojan exiles landing on the shores of a wild and ancient island known as Albion. Among these exiles are two notable warriors, Brutus and Corineus. Brutus, being the chief, claims the land of Albion for his own and renames it Britannia, after himself. It is here, Monmouth tells us, that Britain begins. In this telling, Albion is a wild, savage and dangerous place. Cornwall in particular is framed as a place of primeval danger, for it is already inhabited by giants. Despite this, Brutus grants Cornwall to Corineus. However, his claim is not uncontested. The ferocious and legendary giant Gogmagog thinks otherwise. According to Geoffrey of Monmouth, Corineus sends out scouts into the land, but they are promptly attacked by the giants and they flee. In the ensuing battle, Corineus challenges Gogmagog to single combat, upon the condition that the victor shall rule the land forevermore. Now, Corineus is a strong and powerful warrior, but we are told that he's no taller than the average man. Gogmagog, on the other hand, reportedly stands at 12 cubits tall, which is about 18 feet or 5.5 meters. Unsurprisingly, Gogmagog agrees to the bout, feeling very confident of his victory. The fight takes place here, on the cliffs of Plymouth Hoe, where Corineus, using his superior skill, knowledge and combat training, somehow manages to lift Gogmagog above his head, whereupon he hurls him from the cliff and smites his ruin on the rocks below. With that act, the rule of the giants is broken, and the land of Cornwall is won. Now, today, Monmouth's history is viewed as pseudo-historical, a literary construction without factual merit. There is no evidence of a race of giants in the archaeological record, and it's my understanding that evidence of Trojans ever settling Britain is just as scant. Similar to Arthurian legend, the story's significance lies in what it reveals about the medieval imagination and the politics of the day. Monmouth was writing at a time when England had only recently unified under a single crown, after centuries of fragmented rule by Anglo-Saxon and Danish kingdoms. By giving everyone a shared origin story, Monmouth's history may have helped to unify the country, and by tracing its roots to Troy, gave the rulers of the day an ancestral link to the age of heroes, allowing them to claim noble descent and justify their authority through an invented lineage. As is so often the case in British mythology, this is where Christian mythology takes over. There are many older stories that highlight giants' playful sides, stories that humanise them and show them to be similar to us in many respects. But later stories sought to portray them as tyrannical, bloodthirsty, sinful creatures. Bolster, the giant of St Agnes, was one such character. Hunt tells us that
Bolster must have been of enormous size, since it is stated that he could stand with one foot on St Agnes's beacon and the other on Carn Bree. These hills being distant as the bird flies 6 miles, his immensity will be clear to all. In proof of this, there still exists in the valley running upwards from Chapel Porth a stone in which may yet be seen the impression of the giant's fingers.
this, as far as we can tell, is that stone. It's a cave with a hole in its roof, and another entrance which, at high tide, runs into the sea. Now, Bolster was cruel to his wife, forcing her to carry stones in her apron to the top of the hill for no reason at all. Hunt describes this as a useless labour, whose traces were said to remain in the grouped stones that were still visible at the top of the hill when Hunt was still writing. Bolster, despite being married, became infatuated with the virtuous and beautiful St Agnes. His advances were repeatedly rejected, but Bolster would not take no for an answer. So it was that St Agnes devised a clever plan to rid both herself and the region of this cruel and terrible menace. She claimed she would return his love if he proved it by filling this hole with his blood. Bolster complied, not realising that the hole opened out into the sea. He bled endlessly until he died of exhaustion. The rocks are still dyed red with his blood. So what are we remembering when we remember the giants? These are beings inextricably tied to the land itself. In Cornish tradition, their names linger in the hilltops and the headlands, their deeds etched into the rocks and ridges. Unlike many mythical beings, giants are rarely described in physical detail. Instead, they're remembered for their actions, for the imprint they left behind. In this way, giants are more like forces of nature than individual beings. The surge of the sea, the upheaval of earth, the storm that reshapes the cliff edge. They're the untamed strength of nature itself. They were here before the fair folk, before the saints, 1,000 years before recorded history. They're the oldest layer of memory, embedded in the ground beneath your feet. Giants are a way for us to understand and appreciate the sheer power and beauty of the natural world around us. Indeed, that's all that's left of them. Their stories have faded, the creatures themselves long gone, their faces all lost to us. Yet the hills remember. Cliffs and barrows mark their resting places. Enormous stones litter the landscape from where they've been hurled for sport. Huge rock formations that look like chairs and tables mark where they took their rest. Little clues to a mythic history half recalled and half forgotten. These fragments are symbols of our attempts to understand the grandeur of the world and our place within it. They're a reminder that even these beings, whose power allowed them to shape the very earth, are now long gone. We don't know what they look like, only what they achieved. It's a reminder that when all is said and done, and when each of us is dead and gone, our faces too will be quickly forgotten. When the human race is ended and the time comes for another to hold stewardship of the earth, will our deeds, just like those of the giants, outlast our memory? Surely, we must hope so. The question is, what will we have left behind? What will be the deeds for which we are remembered? How will we have left our mark on the landscape? In the future, will we be the grand and powerful giants of Cornish tradition, or simply the foolish, lumbering monsters who pillaged the earth? The answer to that question is up to us.